Hi, this is Abby from Witchcraft Criminal History. How you doing today? Hopefully you're doing well. Well, I'm doing a video on something which has recently have come up again, and a lot of people going, "Yay, they solved it! Yay!" This is old news, but to me it's old news because this came out in 2014 that they found DNA on a shore apparently owned by Catherine Eddowes that match Aaron Kosminski. And I find it really interesting that it's come back up again. And now people are going, yay, they solved it. Let's move on to another unknown murderer like the Zodiac. Well, I think you got more chances of discovering who the Zodiac is by DNA than you do with Jack the Ripper. And I do not think it's Aaron. I don't know whether it's Aaron Kosminski. It could be Aaron Kosminski. However, I do not agree with this DNA. Let me take you back to history. The history of forensic science. Back when these murders occurred in 1888, forensic science was in its infancy. And there was no such thing as DNA. There was no such thing as blood type. They have no idea what blood type was. There was no fiber analysis. There was no hair analysis. And I think forensic entomology was also in its infancy at that particular time. I think that it was kind of in use, like on and off of entomology. But once again, I'm not really quite sure. But I do know that was actually forensic entomology was actually invented by the Chinese nearly about 1500s roundabouts. So entomology is one of the oldest forms of forensic science. And if you want to know what entomology is the study of insects. However, going back to 1888, there was no fingerprints. The first convicted fingerprints was done, I think, in early 1900s. So it would be like before 1910. It was about these two guys who robbed a store, murdered a couple of people, and their fingerprints were found on the cash box. And that's how they were caught. I'll do a video on that a little bit later on. But getting back to Jack the Ripper. They did not have DNA. They did not have fingerprints. And fingerprints is also one of the oldest ones. And this was prior to fingerprints. There was, at that time, a whole heap of files which I can't remember what it was exactly called, but it was pretty much all the specifications of the human face of criminals. They would have the length of the head, the width of the head, the colour of the eyes, the width of the eyebrows, how far away from the nose, how symmetrical the faces. They had that, then they had thousands upon thousands, and when they have criminals coming in, it would take them quite some time because that was their form of identification for criminal identification, which nowadays we no longer do. We do not do that anymore. However, let's talk about the crime scenes and what happened back in 1888. Back in 1888, when a person got murdered, it pretty much turned into a circus. And what I mean by turning into a circus, pretty much every Tom, Dick and Harry, from very poor to very rich, would come and view the crime scene. This would have happened to every single one of Jack the Ripper's victims, from Polly Nichols to Mary Kelly. People would even go into the surrounding shops or residents and pay a few tuppence to look out a window or go to the roof of a business And they would do that, as a form of money. And people were very poor in Whitechapel. So, like I said, it was certainly a circus. If you want to know what it was like, the modern equivalent is pretty much, football. When you see a football match, there's tons upon tons of people there cheering on their teams. This is no different to 1888 in regards to crime scenes. So, and also another thing, back in 1888, they did not secure the crime scene. Like today, when a body is found, they lock down the area. They shut down the area and they secure the area. No one's allowed to come in or out around the particular crime scene. So you cannot pay, say, $50 or £50 to someone and say, oh, can I go and see the crime scene? It wasn't done. It's not done today. Because it was, big no-no. Because they have to preserve the crime scene and preserve the evidence so they can hopefully convict a criminal. Back in 1888, there was very little to none of that. Little to none. Because, like I said, back then, there was no fire analysis, no DNA, no blood type. And heck, the only crime of Jack the Ripper's that was cordoned off was with Mary Kelly, and that was because they were hoping for a bloodhound to come along to follow the scent of Jack the Ripper. However, the dog never turned up. I don't know why the dog didn't turn up. The dog never turned up. And also, Mary Kelly was the only one who was photographer, who had pictures taken of her at the crime scene. She was the only one. The other ones also had photos taken, but that was done at the mortuary. So, people, like I said, were contaminated in the crime scenes. And also, you got another thing. If there was, and it wasn't documented either, the shawl, even if this was the genuine article, it would have been passed down for over 100 years. That's 100 years. Been passed from, mother to child or father to child, going on and on and on, or sold. It would have been contaminated over and over and over again. And it wouldn't be just that. It would also have been cross-contaminated by the people who arrived at the crime scene itself. They never used gloves. Because as I said, there was no forensic science back then. Or the little forensic science they had was in its infancy. So they wouldn't use gloves. Heck, the person who would say be the medical examiner, they too wouldn't be using gloves. And yet they are performing the autopsies. And that's just to prove of where things were back then. They had no due care. None. So, any type of evidence, isn't good. And especially like with one of those letters, the Jews are not who they thought to be, or something like that. That was actually taken down by the police, and they actually washed off the wall. Back in these days, you wouldn't do that. You'd probably take the wall with you. You'd take photos and probably remove the wall, because it's evidence. But back in 1888, they destroyed it. So you would have also had a lot of cross-contamination. And then you also got not only the cross-contamination going on, the DNA also would have degenerated. You wouldn't be able to really read too much from Catherine Eddowes if it belonged to Catherine Eddowes, DNA, let alone a perpetrator. And they said they found semen on the shawl. Once again, that is pretty much bollocks. Because the simple fact is, once again, it's a bodily fluid and it probably would have been deteriorized. There is expiry date to DNA. There's a reason why Jurassic Park cannot really happen, because DNA expires. Heck, I reckon it would have been expired for Jack the Ripper in 1888, let alone millions of years ago. Because it does expire. So, to say the least, this is a load of crap. Sorry to say, but it is a load of crap. So, it would have been very hard. And if they did find DNA, by some miracle of God, they found DNA. Solid DNA, which wasn't contaminated, which was perfectly preserved. And this is like 1 billion to 1. And I'm not exaggerating those odds. They put them in 1 billion to 1. That this DNA, they would have had to look at the mitochondrial DNA. Because it is the strongest. It is the long-lasting part of DNA. Even crimes today, they would use the first point of call when they are identifying someone. If they find a dead body or they found blood at a crime scene, mitochondrial DNA is the first thing they go for. It is the go-to. The mitochondrial DNA, if you want to, it's a little bit of science history or a little bit of science. If you don't like science, skip this. But this is a bit about science. Mitochondrial DNA is, I figure it's inside the cells. You get that inside your cells. And mitochondrial DNA is passed from mother to child. Mitochondrial DNA, your mitochondrial DNA, my mitochondrial DNA, mine would have been identical to my mother's DNA. It would have been identical to my mum's. Because mitochondrial, as I said, mitochondrial DNA is passed down from mother to child. However, it is lost, primarily it's lost when it goes from father to child. That is lost. The mitochondrial DNA gets lost. And it is replaced with whoever that person's with and their child. So whoever the child's mother is, the child will get her mitochondrial DNA, not her father's or his father's. So they would have been looking at mitochondrial DNA. They would have had to try and get the best mitochondrial DNA, the strongest. They would have had to try and find someone who came from a pure, female bloodline. So this would have been, like for Aaron Kazimitsky, this would have had to been his biological sister by his mother. It could be like his half-sister, his wife, if his mother had 2 husbands. I don't know, but it had to be related to her. Whoever Aaron Kazimitsky's mother is. And it would have been from mother to daughter, or mother to daughter to granddaughter. Because that would be the strongest way of identifying whether or not it is. Because it would just state, the mitochondrial state would tell you that this mitochondrial DNA is identical to the perpetrator's mitochondrial DNA, so they are related. They share a female lineage. They share it. So they would have been working with that. But as I said, I do not agree with this because the simple fact is that, as I said, let's go for the points. Point 1. The crime scenes were well and truly contaminated. And also the way things are, this was horses and carriages, so you also would have had DNA from animals. Whether it's horses, cats, dogs, rats, pigeons, you would have been contaminated with that. You also would have been contaminated by the crowds, and there would have been, thousands of people coming to view these scenes. You also would be contaminated by the police and medical staff as well. So, and also the people who discovered the body as well, that also would have been contaminants. So it would have been well and truly contaminated with that. Second bit, even if this sure didn't, was the real deal, it would have been passed down for 100 years. So it would have been further contaminated by other people's DNA who had nothing to do with the crime. Nothing. There would have been people in the 1950s DNA would be on there, and they certainly wasn't around during Jack the Ripper times in Victorian England. So you would have had their DNA on there, because it was being passed on and on and on. And also you had the DNA being degraded. It would have been severely degraded. So it definitely wouldn't work out for that either. So all in all, if this went for a legal case, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. As they say in a lot of shows, what I've seen with Jack the Ripper, and from my knowledge, and I agree, the only way you're going to catch Jack the Ripper was catching him in red-handed, which means catching him in the act. We can't do that unless we get a time machine and go back to 1888 to when one of these murders were occurring. And that's how pretty much murderers were caught back in 1888, because they were pretty much caught red-handed. Got their hand, caught in the till, so to speak. And this never happened, because the police had, nothing to go by. So yeah, and I've got a book of it, which is called Naming Jack the Ripper, and this is all about this DNA evidence. There's always going to be new contestants or new evidence identifying Jack the Ripper. However, as I said, personally, the only way you're going to know 100% who Jack the Ripper is if you go in a time machine and go back to 1888. That's the only way you're going to know. You got more chances of finding out who the Zodiac Killer is than you do of finding Jack the Ripper. So this is just my point of view, and this is also a little bit of history for you of what life was like back in 1888 and where forensic science was. Yes, there are mysteries back in 1880s and 1890s. Heck, there was one crime, which I will be talking about this killer as well, and police are baffled. Modern day police, not the police back then, but modern day police, they were baffled to find lockets of hair in evidence. As I said, back then there was the science of hair wasn't done back in 1888 or in the 1890s. It wasn't done. So, like I said, forensic science was in its infancy. And the only forensic science that could probably help would be forensic entomology. However, none of these victims really lasted that long to get infested with insects. So yeah, well anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Have a great day and blessed be.